Welcome everyone to this special interview with one of our dear board members, Dr. Russell Jeung, who is out in the West Coast and is one of the leaders of the Stop AAPI movement, along with Manju Kulkarni and Cynthia Che, who actually recently just received the Distinguished Time 100 Person of the Year Award. And so we wanted to get together to hear about what that has been like, how that has led, how all the work that they have done has led to that point, and what that experience has been like, and what they're seeing really God doing in and through kind of the work of Stop AAPI Hate, and more specifically through the work of our dear friend, Dr. Russell Jeung. And so, Russell, it's so good to be with you. Thank you so much for everything that you've been doing. First of all, how are you doing?
Oh, thanks for asking, Raymond. Glad to be here. Doing pretty well. It's a time for we at Stop AAPI Hate to have a little breather and to think long-term of what are our strategic plans, what are our next steps. The movement has really grown over the past year. We have more resources now, so we can actually not just react to the racism, but actually address it for the long haul and try to prevent it in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that, because of the work that you and the others have done through Stop AAPI Hate, so many organizations, including AACC, have been able to kind of clamp down on real data and real information to share about the difficult and painful realities of racism that Asian Americans and violence ensuing as a result of that racism that so many Asian Americans and Asians in the United States have experienced. In fact, it really was kind of the meat of what allowed us to put together our first statement, which you were part of, in advocating for kind of a deeper awareness and a solidarity for in opposition to the racism that we've been experiencing as Asian Americans, and the rise of the racism that we saw. I think at the time was about 3,000 incidents, which is now close to 10,000 that have been submitted to Stop AAPI Hate. So I want to say thank you for all the work that Stop AAPI Hate has been doing, and for all the things that have taken place through your organization and as a result of your organization. I'd love to hear kind of what's it been like leading up to kind of the more recent kind of realities of receiving the Time 100 Persons of the Year award. I mean, like, what do you think has led to that? Because I think I've been able to journey closely with you and see all the work that you've been doing, but it would be cool if we kind of pulled back the curtain for a second and allowed other people to see that it wasn't just like kind of like just the data that you produced, but there was other things that you were doing behind the scenes to really help advocate for Asians and Asian Americans in the United States.
Yeah, well, yeah, the behind the scenes picture of what God's been doing is a testimony I don't often tell in secular groups, but this is my faith-based perspective, my Christian perspective. So early on last year in February, I was really wondering, God, what are you calling to me next? And I was being hopefully prayerful about it, wanting to be open to seeing where he would lead me in my work, and maybe the next book I would write. I thought about, and I may still do someday, writing a book about the gifts of the Asian American church, what we have to offer to the broader church. Because a lot of Asian Americans are attending now multi-ethnic churches, but pastors don't know what to do with them, right? And how to best use them. And Asian Americans themselves feel like they don't have anything to offer, so they just sort of blend in. But so I'm praying about that, and then the pandemic hits and the surge of racism starts. And for me, that too was a step of faith, of wanting, I know God wants us to reflect his values of justice, to seek first his kingdom and his kingdom of right relations and righteousness. And so for me, trying to stem the racism is just an outgrowth of my own belief in what Jesus would want us to do. And so we began to document it. And again, for me, being really prayerful, God, and this is what I normally pray in the morning, is God, let my work be an offering to you, and may you bear fruit in any way you want. And so for me, it's again a matter of being faithful and not really trying to be effective and come up with, I'm going to be really clear, I want to affect this type of result, or I want to bear this kind of fruit. It was just very open-ended. I just think this is the right thing to do, that we need to do. And so we began to document the racism, and that just documenting the racism for a lot of people, like you said, helped, because beforehand people had nowhere to like sink their teeth into to say, yeah, Asian Americans currently are facing hardship and difficulty and marginalization. So it gave people ammunition, documentation to launch their organization. So in a lot of places where I've been going, people said, oh yeah, we've used your data to ask for ethnic studies here. Oh yeah, we use your data to start an employee groups here. Oh yeah, we've used the data to call for institutional change for more diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then the Asian American Christian Collaborative really used the data, right, to call out the racism, to call for repentance. And I've seen God really use that, the Asian American Christian Collaborative, and I actually say this in most of my presentations. That's the kind of change we've been able to make. I've been able to see Christians come together across theological divides. This is the largest Asian American Christian movement in my lifetime to fight against coming together for anything. And it's coming together for justice, which has been like an answered prayer for me. You know, I've been praying this for decades now, that God would start a movement among the Asian American Christian community for justice. And, you know, my wife knew this when she married me, that that's what I thought my calling was. And who knew that this would be the way God would use my life and my sense of calling to help start a movement. So it's not just speak clearly. It's first of all, God calling the people together, God using the data, and God using individuals like you and across the nation, wherever that, to stand up and build the movement together. So for me, that's my testimony now, is I've been able to witness God move throughout our broader community to make us stand up. And that's pretty remarkable, because when you think about it, we've been a community that has been characterized as quiet, as complacent. The Christian community has been conservative and focused on survival or focused on mobility. And so to see Asian Americans concerned with justice, to recognize systemic injustice and wanting to work in solidarity with others, really is a spirit-led movement. It's not anything that we could manufacture or plan for, but it really was God working in our midst, I think, and an answer to thousands of people's prayer.
That's actually really powerful and very encouraging. I mean, as you were sharing, I'm actually realizing like that God has really been on the move, at least within the work of AACC, because of our partnership, and you know, in large part because of your support too, where you know we are seeing people from all over the country really kind of gather and rally together to contribute everything from articles to sharing the statements that we're writing, to the point where tens of thousands of people that are kind of a part of what we now kind of call the Asian American Christian Collaborative, and that we like you have been invited into some conversations with. You know, I'm serving on a anti-racism committee for the mayor's office in the city of Chicago. We've been in touch with several senators and other politicians. We've been in connection with the White House, and just to see that because of the work that God has been doing through us, that we're actually being able to advocate in these kind of spaces that I never thought we would be in is pretty remarkable. But you know, on a lighter note, you know, you have been in conversations with with people that many people would recognize and are aware of. What's most remarkable about your story personally, that I think, is that like you've been faithfully living your life, serving refugees and people who the Bible would clearly identify as those who are overlooked and oftentimes underserved. And everything from driving people to the grocery stores to to hosting Bible studies and things of that nature, and people that many people wouldn't really take the time out of their day to engage in long-term deep community with. That's been your life. And then all of a sudden you went from that to being called fam by people like Olivia Munn and all these other famous people, being in rooms with some very prominent Asian and non-Asian Americans. What's that been like for you, and how has that actually informed your own faith, your own spirituality, especially as that's been taking place?
I think it's fun for me, at least, to be able to swim in different worlds. I think not too many people have that opportunity to talk to a range of people. But again, I guess I feel pretty grounded that I meet Jesus among the poor. It's the Matthew 25. If I am with the least of these, I'm with Jesus. And if I'm with the most of these, then I'm not with Jesus in a lot of ways, right? I think that grounds me and reminds me of what the movement's about. I see, I have a Vietnamese grandfather next door who goes out for morning walks, and I watch him go out and I worry for him. And I think that's what I think about in stopping AAPI hate. It's not to meet with leaders or to be in the press, but it's to help people like him walk safely. So I think being where I am helps keep me grounded and reminds me, there's a lot to work on. I think God's given me thorns in the flesh where I really know my weaknesses that keep me humble. He's given me a community that holds me accountable. So it's easy for me to get big-headed or to like having discussions with policymakers or with the media. And so I'm grateful for people in my neighborhood who keep me grounded and in my church. And so it's both and. It's fun. I don't hate it, but I'm also cautious of getting too big-headed. And, I'm worried sort of actually that the moment will pass, that the time where Stop AAPI Hate gets attention or has a platform will shrink. And so we have to both leverage the moment and make use of the time to build those relationships so we could engage over the long haul. And so a lot of it is relationship building with both big mucky mucks and keeping grounded and rooted with our community.
This is what I love about you, Russell. It's always this kind of the sober mindedness that you kind of walk around through life with, and I think it's been very informative for me as well. Just as I've kind of watched your life, I think your life really shines in a way that the gospel is proclaimed, and I appreciate that. But one of the things that recently did happen, and one of the reasons that we're having this conversation now, is that you did win, along with your co-founders, the Time 100 Person of the Year award. What's it like to have won that? I mean, I'm sure that wasn't something that you were necessarily expecting. What's that been like for you?
I think it helps me realize how big this movement has become, how influential it is, how serious the problem was, and then how much the community has really stood up to resist the racism. So it's hard for me to think that I'm influential, right? I always joke about how in my own household of three, I'm the third most influential. And if we had a plant, I'd be the fourth, right? And We don't even have plants. So, but they would be more influential than me. So for me, it's to think that I have influence or voice. It's sort of, I'm not used to that idea. Like I'm like an Asian American who feels voiceless or invisible. And so to think of myself as having influence is presumptuous and staggering. But I do recognize, no, this is a widespread issue and that people have really galvanized around it. And it's not just me, but people across the nation from all walks of life have done what they needed to do to stand up to the racism. So I think that's who Time wanted to recognize, that they recognized that there's a huge movement and they just needed to find people who sort of represent it, right? People who helped spearhead it maybe. But really, I do think, so it's hard for me to believe that I'm influential, but it's easy for me to see that this has been an influential movement that has, that is on the forefront of legislators and mainstream media, and that may change how Asian Americans are perceived and how they engage in society moving forward. So that's super influential, right? If we could swing an entire racial group towards racial justice, if we could move a community group to be the bridge for racial healing, that is pretty influential. And that's my hope. That's what I pray for. So it's been a sobering period, a really traumatizing period. But as we come out of it, it can be the moment where we created a movement, sort of like a civil rights movement for Asian Americans, right? That changes our path. That's pretty influential. That's pretty staggering to think about. To think, no, we are actually making history now, and that it's people are making history, not leaders, not policymakers, not famous people, but a community overall is changing history. And that's why for Stop AAPI Hate, building the movement has always been sort of in the back of our minds, our objective. In my prayers, decades ago, it was part of my prayers. So
Yeah, that's
movement's
awesome.
influential.
Yeah,
Yeah, it is. It is sort of cool.
Yeah. I mean, especially because I think about like Luke 16, it's whoever's faithful in the little things, will be faithful in the great things or in the large things. And, and I think that's kind of been the testament of your life, for decades. I still remember the first time. I'm just kind of spending my time celebrating you, mostly because even with friends, mutual friends that you and I know, when we think about Asian American Christians, you really are one of the models of people that we say, man, if we had more people like Russell, it would be like the world would be a better place. Not because, we just want to like spend all this time. And this is even before, Stop AAPI Hate happened. I mean, these are conversations that we've been having for, 5, maybe 10 years that I've been a part of. And then I'm sure that others have been a part of those conversations, saying very similar things, for far longer. And so even before Stop AAPI Hate, we've kind of seen you as a model for Christian faith who's been faithful in the small things and doing all these things quietly, in obedience to Jesus. And I think what we're seeing right now is the culmination of a long life of faithful obedience in the same direction as Eugene Peterson would have called it. And so that's really that's really encouraging. I am wondering. There's actually two questions I want to ask you, and then we'll wrap up. But the first thing is that you've for a long time worked across religious and non-religious lines, as someone who is a devout Christian. Like this is every time I talk to you, anytime that you can tie the work that you're doing to your faith, you've always expressed that this is where your heart is, right? And so one of the things that I think Christians can easily fall into the trap of is kind of like entering into our own little silos, that we don't work with people who aren't Christian. And so, you also model that in a lot of ways, that you can work across religious lines and still maintain your faith, but also be a light, in whatever settings that you're a part of. Can you speak into a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think this is what I'm learning now, is that God obviously uses broken people like ourselves, right? Because we know our frailty and failings. And if God could use us, God could use other broken people, and God could even use broken institutions. And the part about broken institutions, we know America is embedded in racism, right? That it's founded on principles of slavery, of stealing indigenous lands, of excluding Asians. So how can God use a society that's so broken, that's so based on greed, right, and consumer consumption, and based on exploiting the land? How could God use that system and still bring about his justice? It's the same question about how can God use us as sinners to redeem the world, right? And it's like, that doesn't make sense, but it's actually God's way, right? To give people second chances and to use what's broken to bring about his fullness, to use those who are incomplete to bring about his completeness. And in the same way, I'm seeing now, and I've always heard stories about individuals being redeemed, right? And, you know, coming out of sinfulness and like addictions and being set free. But I always wondered, can God change society? And I could see it even in like other societies, like, oh, he broke apartheid in South Africa, but can he end racism in the US? Can he end, you know, capitalist greed in America? And it's like, doesn't seem plausible. It seems even part of Christianity to support these institutions, right, in some ways. But I think what I'm seeing now is that if God can change me, if God could change the homeless person who's addicted next to me, God could change even, God's big enough to change our society, right? And God's can use even broken institutions to be redeem those institutions and then redeem society. So it's really an interesting hope. It's a big prayer. I've always believed the world's fallen, so let's just sort of ditch this world and hope for the world to come. But now I'm thinking, no, God came to redeem us in the here and now. And in the same way, God could usher in his kingdom in the here and now. It's not completely fulfilled, a world that follows God's reign, but God can use us to redeem institutions, and those redeemed institutions can then help redeem our society. So I see that with Stop AAPI Hate as, for example, in California, we just passed an equity budget, right, that acknowledges racism, acknowledges the wrongs of disparities, and tries to repair it. We were trying to develop, you know, truth and reconciliation commissions with racial justice bureaus. So I think those efforts are limited. They may be just enabling the system to operate as it has. It's not revolutionary enough, but God's using them, and maybe God can, little by little, also bring about more of his values of right relations. So that's what I'm reflecting on is, are we witnessing a period where God's movement of people is bringing about the redemption of the institutions of our society, not just the individuals?
That's really powerful. Before I ask you the final question, which is basically going to be around like, what would you hope other, you know, Asian Americans, more specifically Asian American Christians would do? You know, are there any other ways that you're seeing God move? Especially through the work that you are doing.
I see God changing in me, hopefully. That again, purifying me and trying to. I have all these thorns in the flesh. I have all these sort of sinful patterns that I want to change, and I think I get reminded of them. If I ever get too big-headed or prideful about what's happening to Stop AAPI Hate, I'm reminded, yeah, Russell, you're still a sinner in need of redemption. You're still, you know, I just realized I'd rather be, instead of being Time's 100 most influential people, I'd rather be God's one that he chases and leaves the 99 for. And because I feel that way, I'm the lost sheep still. I'm not the 100 most influential, but I do feel like I'm a lost sheep. And so I'm happy to be found. So in that way, I feel like God's continually to hopefully changing me. And then yeah, churches everywhere, I think, are talking about this. And even if they're talking about it in terms of how to pray about it, that's a big change for a lot of churches, right? If we talk about talking about it from the pulpit, just to talk about a societal issue, I think that's a starting point where pastors could make the faith relevant. I see God making Asian Americans visible to the broader church too, to see, okay, facing systemic injustice. Here's another community that needs to be included. Here's another community whose voice and leaders we need to hear from. So I think that's a good thing, that God's always lifting up the voiceless. God's always among the stranger. And again, this is the Matthew 25, and this is what I want the Asian American church to realize. We're always trying to not be the stranger. We're always trying to fit in. We're always trying to belong. And but maybe we should realize we're the stranger in Matthew 25 that Jesus invited in, and that others need to invite in. And even though it's a position of weakness, of low status, that's where Jesus is, and that's where we can be met as well.
Thanks for that. That's beautiful, as always. So the final question I have for you then is, what do you hope Asian American Christians, especially who are tuning in and who kind of watch this interview, would do as they move forward?
Yeah. Hey, Asian American Christian, I want you to pray like your grandmothers do. That for me, again, gaining world's influence isn't as powerful as gaining God's influence. That prayer is our way to access that power and that grace. And so remain faithful in seeking God first in prayer and in corporate prayer.
Amen. Well, thank you so much, Russell. It's fantastic to continue to journey with you, and to really have you as someone who is advocating for Asian Americans broadly, especially as a Christian, and know that there are many people who are praying for you and are celebrating you today.
Thank you. Yeah, and thank you everyone who are praying. I do feel those prayers, and I actually talked about that too, about the support I've gotten from the community, and so thank you.
All right. If you haven't read his book, you should pick it up. It's At Home in Exile. That's probably the one that's most recent. It's on the other side of his shoulder. It kind of goes through kind of the things that he's seeing and experiencing on the day to day, and what he's been seeing, and then also if you experience anything, any form of violence or attack, or any form of hate incident that might emerge, please do report it to Stop AAPI Hate. The website is available in multiple languages, and of course, follow Russell in the work that he's doing through that. And then if you haven't subscribed to AACC, please do so on our social media, Twitter at Asian American AA Christ Collab. That's on Instagram as well, AA Christ Collab. And then subscribe to our newsletter on our website. You can just go onto our website, AAChristiancollaborative.com or AsianAmericanChristianCollaborative.com, and make sure you get our weekly or our regular updates. With that said, hope this was beneficial and a blessing to you. Have a wonderful day.